We're going to talk about the pros and cons of both renting and buying, because the answer is not a one-size-fits-all. And if I have to listen to Grant Cardone or meet Sethi or one of these guys talking about how you should all be renters forever, I am going to lose my mind, because here's the thing. There are times where renting makes sense, and there's times when buying makes sense. And we're going to answer those questions right now. And here's my opinion. You are going to feel judged no matter which one you choose, right? Whether you rent or buy, you buy or rent, your mom and parents say you should or you shouldn't. So let's clear some things up right now. What I'm going to show you is the math they don't want you to see. And there are times where you just need to know your numbers. And there are times in your life where this is a very individualistic decision. And so when somebody says it's extreme one way or extreme the other way, they don't know what the hell they're talking about. So what I'm going to do is walk you through the actual math between renting versus buying. And these are not opinions. This is not having emotions. This is so that you can make the decision that moves you closer to financial freedom, not further away from it, okay? And why does this matter so much? This matters because housing is the biggest financial decision that most people will ever make. And making the wrong decision can quietly set you back 5 or 10 years. So when I hear someone like Grant saying, your primary residence, nobody should ever buy, they should always be renters, that's because he wants to go out and buy a 400-unit apartment building and make you all renters. Well, what he has to understand is if you're not an entrepreneur and you're not a business owner and you're not someone that's going to make exponential amounts of money, owning your primary residence, which I personally will tell you, I think of less as an investment versus buying rental property, is still an investment. And for most people, it is their number one piece of their net worth. So I spent 25 years in real estate, and I've seen people win by renting, and I've seen people win by buying, and I've seen it in reverse. I've seen people lose by buying, and I've seen people lose by renting. And the difference is never the headlines. It's just the math. It's just the timing and knowing what works for you. So let's clear this up, okay? There is no morally right answer. There's no one strategic one that everyone should be following. Buying a house, let's get this clear right now. Buying a house by itself will not make you successful, and making smart money and financial decisions will. And renting is not throwing away money, because there's times where it makes sense, but buying is, again, not automatically a great investment. So let's talk about these things. And here's the thing about personal finance and, single family homes and people buying their first house is this. It is super emotional. And why is it so emotional? Because here's the thing. People have been sold this American dream that you have to own a house in order to feel like you're successful. And I personally think owning a house is still the American dream. And I still think owning a house is one of the things that should be in your toolbox in order to get financially free. But here's the thing. You get pressure from your family. You get pressure from social media, the adulting culture where there's so many 20 and 30-year-olds still living at home, or the fear of missing out and my friends bought a house, but I didn't. And here's the truth. Most people buy because they feel behind, not because they've ran the numbers and not because the numbers make sense. My daughter's been a realtor with me now for a couple of years. And if you watch my other YouTube channel, you'd know that. And she currently still lives in my house. She's 24 years old, and we're trying to figure out what makes sense. She's going to be moving out shortly. She's going to rent for a little while, because buying a home on her own right now just doesn't make sense for her in this time frame. But long term, she will be a homeowner. She really wants to buy a home, but she needs to figure that out when the time is right, okay? Fear is an expensive advisor. Think about that for a minute. And if she were being fearful and going, say, I got to buy now because I'm never going to be able to afford to do it down the road, it might be a terrible decision and a terrible timing for her, okay? So let's talk about that. The real cost of buying in 2026. I want to break this down because my friend Ramit Sethi all the time talks about these phantom costs, okay? If you work with a good professional veteran real estate agent, there are not going to be phantom costs. You're going to know all the costs when you go to buy a house. And here they are. You have the down payment, of course. Then when you're starting to make your payment, you're going to have the principal and interest. You're going to always have property taxes, homeowner's insurance, and then you're going to have to talk about things like repairs that need to happen potentially during a transaction. You're going to talk about the cost of the transaction. So there are costs involved, whether it's inspections, whether it's lender fees, whether it's working with a title company or a law firm, depending on what part of the country you live in. And of course, depending on the condition of the property, you might have long-term maintenance, the things that you need to think about, because maybe the roof is only going to last 5 more years. There's all kinds of costs you need to be thinking about. You also might be living in a homeowner association. So these are things that you need to be thinking about. And when they try to say the mortgage is the minimum you'll pay, in some ways they are right. But when they try to say things that rent is the maximum you're going to pay if you were to go out and rent something, that is not true. We're going to talk about that here in a minute. But home ownership, to be honest with you, is forced responsibility. You have to maintain and keep up a property, but it is not guaranteed wealth building. Now, if you own any home long enough, yes, you're going to pay down the principal. Yes, you're going to have the price of the house go up, because if anyone told me now houses 10 years from now are not going to be more expensive than they are now, I'm just not going to believe them, okay? So let's talk about the cost of renting, and let's be super fair. If you don't know, I do property management. Me and my team, we manage about 85, 95 rental houses. And here's what things they don't ever talk to you about, okay? Rent goes up. It is very rare in my career of doing property management that a rent actually ever goes down. So typically every year it will go up, or at minimum it's going to stay flat. You're not building up equity in the house, and you have less control. So what do we mean by less control? Well, they always talk about renting gives you flexibility, which it does, but it also gives you flexibility in the fact that you might get forced to move. And sometimes you get some people that have maybe rented from somebody for 5, 10, 20 years, and now they're on a really low rent because they've got a great relationship with that owner. And now that owner sells the house, and now your rent goes double, triple, or it goes up $100, $200 a year. So there's flexibility in the fact that you can give notice at the end of a year. But what they don't talk about is if you have a house, and I try to coach people up on this too, if you buy a house, you also could go still move somewhere, and you don't have to sell the house. You can keep it and turn it into a rental. So there's still the ability to move if you're an owner as well, okay? You do have more liquidity. You are going to have lower surprise costs because you're typically not going to be the one that has to do maintenance. But the rent is not your minimum cost, because here's the thing. You break something on your own, you throw a rock through the window, you drive your car through the front driveway or through the garage door, the owner's not going to have to pay for that. You're going to still pay for some of those things. There is some maintenance stuff that you never have to worry about, but renting buys you a little more options, a little more flexibility, and they're going to say buying ties you down, but I don't disagree. I disagree with that. I think for many people, especially younger first-time home buyers, a lot of those houses become good rentals, and you can still move without having to sell the house, okay? Here's one of my favorite other things that we talk about, and Ramit likes to bring this one up all the time, is opportunity cost. So let's use a real-life example real quick. If I took that $50,000 and invested in the stock market, and the stock market went up 10%, I made $5,000 on my money, right? Well, that same $50,000 is locked up in my down payment of my house that allowed me to buy a $500,000 house, and that house goes up by 10%. It didn't go up by just the $50,000 I put as the down payment. It goes up by 10% of the $500,000 that I paid for the house. So now my house is worth $550,000, and now my original 50 is 100. So I use leverage, and I was able to make a whole lot more money. So opportunity cost, I don't want to hear about that, because you're now able to own assets that are 10 times as valuable than you would if you just would invest in the stock market. So, I don't want to hear that. When they talk about reduced flexibility, if you had money tied up and built up a ton of equity in the house, you can find a home equity loan. You can find ways to tap into that money. You don't necessarily have to sell the house in order to do that. So when people talk about opportunity cost of the money, it just drives me crazy, because there are ways to tap into the equity of the house, okay? So let's tie this back again to trying to get that first $10,000 invested, the systems, when to buy a house versus the status, the cash flow of the house, because again, you could always keep it as a rental. You don't necessarily have to sell the house. So the other thing they talk about, it's equity you can't access, so it doesn't pay your bills. Have you ever heard of a home equity line of credit? You can always refinance your house and be able to pull some of that equity out. So when people say you can't get to that money, you can. It might be a little more challenging. It might be a little less liquid than if it was just invested in the stock market, but you absolutely can get to that money, okay? So let's talk about, when does buying make sense, okay? Buying can be smart for a lot of reasons, but you're usually going to hear people talking about you need to stay in this house for 5 to 7 years. Well, you don't necessarily have to live in it for 5 to 7 years. You probably need to own it for at least 5 to 7 years. So if you bought a house, you lived in it for a year or two, and now you got job transfer to another state, there's no law that says you have to sell the house. You can keep the house, play out the long game, let the value of it go up, and be able to win. So if you do that, a lot of times people, especially when they were buying into lower interest rates, right? You didn't hear people talking about renting when I was getting 3% mortgages. But if you do that, I have a house right now that has probably $400,000 worth of income in it. I could sell it, get all the equity out of it, or I could rent it out for probably about $1,000 a month and have some income coming in. So there's some ways that you can do all this stuff. But typically, they're going to tell you if you're going to stay in the house for longer, if you're someone who has a stable income that can afford to make those payments, and you're not overdoing it, overstretching for the house payment, and you can still do other investing outside of your house, right? This is when buying makes sense. So you're buying for lifestyle, you're buying for stability and being able to be in a neighborhood to where now you're not going to ever be forced to move. You're going to be able to go to the certain schools that you want to go to. There are some reasons why investing in a neighborhood and a community and owning property absolutely makes sense, but buying should support your life and not consume it. So you don't want to make yourself to the position where you're house poor. Okay. So now let's talk about when renting makes sense. And renting is smart when maybe you move to a new city, you don't know anything about it, and you want that flexibility to say, I want to rent for 6 or 12 months and then buy a house. Or I don't even know if I'm going to like this community, so I took a job here, and that way I want to be here for a year, and maybe I'm going to move to the next city in a year. So you're not sure about your long-term things, and you don't want to potentially have a home that might be a rental in that community. So it gives you that flexibility. Maybe you're someone who's still building up your income, and you're in an entry-level job, and maybe you don't feel like you're making enough money quite yet to buy a house and you want to rent. Or you're basically saying, hey, I can get really cheap rent, and I'm going to aggressively invest all this other money so that I can build up a bigger nest egg to buy a better house. You can do that as well. And you don't want to tap that money into a house because you feel it's too risky. That's cool too. You're also unsure again about your career, your location, but you're just not sure exactly what you want to do. So don't feel like renting is a failure. It's often a time for a strategic pause in your life. It's trying to figure out where you want to be long term. And hell, what's crazy is I've been a homeowner ever since I was 23 years old. And if I go ahead and sell the house I live in later this year, I might, for the first time, actually not own my primary residence and rent for a short period while I'm trying to figure out a few things in my life. So there are times where it just makes sense, okay? Here are the biggest mistakes people make. I want to call them out right now. If you're buying a house or overbuying a house to impress your friends, your family, or making it try to be like you're a baller because look at my cool place, don't do that. If you're stretching to the point where you're making your payment way too big a percentage of your income, I like to see people stay at most in the low 30, 32, 34, 36%. But if you're someone who knows, hey, I'm going to have a second income soon, or my spouse, or I'm getting married, and you're going from one income to two, and for a short time, maybe you're stretching it a little bit, great, but it's not something you want to do for the long term. You're ignoring maybe the condition of the property, knowing that having to buy this house, but it's going to need a lot of things over the next 3 to 5 years. You got to be very careful with that. And then you're also assuming things are going to appreciate no matter what, and that will save you where you're spending the equity of your house. I've seen people do this way too many times where they're just using their house like an ATM machine, and it's not really the way they need to do it. So here's the biggest mistake I see people make when they go out and buy a house, okay? If you're buying because you want to impress your friends and family, don't do that. Don't buy too expensive, too big, too nice. It's not going to be a good reason. The only time I want people maybe stretching a little bit for a payment is if you know, hey, I'm getting ready to start having kids. Maybe I want to buy a little bit bigger house, so I'm not going to have to move in a few years. I've seen a few people do that, but we got to be real smart with our numbers while we're paying attention to that, okay? The other mistake people make is ignoring the maintenance, ignoring the condition. That's something as realtors we want to help you do. So there's things that you're going to know in the next 3, 5, 7 years that might be coming up on these properties. The other mistake I see people make is they use their house like a freaking ATM machine, living that lifestyle they can't afford. And then what they do is they just assume the house is going to keep appreciating, it's going to keep going up in value, and over time that'll help them out. They can refinance the house, and you got to be careful with that. So you just have to be real careful. You don't want to treat your house as your only investment. You want to be able to afford something that you can still do your 401k through work, or your Roth IRA, or investing in your non-retirement accounts, okay? Because a house is not going to fix your bad money habits. It's only going to amplify them. So here's the final question. If you're going to buy or rent, just don't lie to yourself about why you're doing it. Don't do it for any other reason than you want to do it. And then go out and talk to a professional, and let's figure out the pros and cons about what makes sense, where I should buy it, what I should spend, what I can afford, and go out and have someone really help you do this and ask the questions. And trust me, there are amazing realtors all over the country that will help you answer these questions. So if you don't know how to find one, reach out to me. I'll help you find one. And just know this is a huge financial decision, and do it when you are ready so that you can win at the game of money and finance.